Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. As we reflect upon the past year, it is not surprising that COVID-19 dominated education, much as it did everything else. If you're a parent or caregiver with school-age children, or even a college student, you know how disruptive this virus has been. But along the way, the pandemic highlighted some key education issues that are likely to be with us for years to come. Today, EdCast speaks with author and CUNY professor David Bloomfield about the ways the coronavirus has shaped education. We'll also take a look at the Trump-DeVos legacy and what we might expect from a Biden administration. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today is David Bloomfield, attorney and professor of educational leadership, law and policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. Professor Bloomfield specializes in education law, school district management, school reform, and legislative matters. His views are frequently sought out by major news media outlets. Thank you so much for joining us today on EdCast. I doubt when you thought about this year in education a year ago, you could have anticipated COVID-19 in any way and how that would have such a big impact on education. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what stands out for you the most when you're looking back and you're thinking of the impact of COVID-19 on education?
Well, Linda, it's very good to see you again, if only on Zoom. The most important thing, I think, is the movement to remote learning for the students. About 80% of our students, when we're taping today, are doing remote learning. That has impacted them in ways that I'm sure we don't really even understand yet, whether it's a shift to remote learning or a subsequent rejection of remote learning, the tremendous pressures, not only on the students, but on parents around New York City and the country and the world. And on the teachers and principals who have had to shoulder the instructional burdens of this pandemic. But it all centers around that shift from live to remote instruction.
Absolutely. And I want to break that down with you a little bit more because there's so many factors feeding in to that, and that is who gets remote instruction, who doesn't. And let's start with who has access to remote instruction. So what we've called the digital divide has certainly been exacerbated by COVID-19. So do we know how our students are faring just in terms of having access?
Our students largely have access, but 100,000 and more students have not had regular access to devices or internet, and that's of grave concern to their educational futures.
I know we've been able to get the laptops into their hands a lot more. I know we had a guest on previously who did speak to that, but he did say that this idea of not having the bandwidth. So that's one aspect. The other thing is, of course, you and I teach older students, college students. The online instruction is working from kindergarten through. Do we have any sense of how it's been affecting the younger students?
Well, I think the question is it affecting them in the sense that they have any idea about the remote instructional environment, particularly in terms of how much time they're really able to spend in terms of attention span in front of a screen with someone talking to them and absorbing. I mean, we know they can spend a lot of time in front of the TV set. But in terms of really absorbing instruction for any length of time, and particularly the youngest children who need to learn kinesthetically through movement and through interaction with in-person interaction with their teachers and their other students, I think we have no idea, or to say it a different way, our idea is like a millionfold. Every kid is having a different experience with this remote instructional environment. And those who are most in need, children who are home insecure, children with severe disabilities have the hardest time even getting access to this technology.
You know, I tell the story now that I did another show on this. A kindergarten teacher was on the program, and he said that some of his students, when they're on Zoom, they cry because they think that all of the other children on the screen are together except them. So they feel, you know, I had no idea, you know, that thought that children would perceive the whole Zoom environment as something, you know, that exclude, you know, they don't understand it. So I thought that was really an interesting thing to think about. So yeah, so online instruction has certainly been an issue. And as you said, for families and parents, I know for the youngest ones, you really have to sit with them and do it with them. So if you're a parent at home and you're working from home, or you're working and you can't be at home, that makes it all the more difficult for students. So the whole idea, of course, of remote instruction having its ups and downs means that we have wanted to move back into the classroom environment. And I think the opening and the closing of schools this year has contributed to the chaos considerably. I mean, I know parents myself, you know, they don't know what's happening one day to the next. Now, what's your take on the opening and we're opening again now for the lower grades in kindergarten? What's your take on how we've been handling this?
I think the mayor has mishandled it. He has not taken medical advice. Now, the medical advice has differed from time to time. He was slow to close the schools when the medical advice said to close them. Then he was slow to open the schools, most recently when the medical advice was to keep the schools open because of the low infection rate coming out of the schools. And so I think the promises and the unkept promises have just added to the anxiety and the lack of confidence in the school system, which again is why so many people have stayed with remote instruction. It may be awful, it may be less good than live instruction, but at least it's reliable from day to day, week to week, and parents need and kids need that kind of consistency.
Now, what's your take now, then again, on this current reopening? So it's going to include the kindergarten kids and the very lower grades, but that's it for now, and everything will be considered in the future. What's your take on what we're doing right now this week?
I think the mayor has stumbled into the right solution because the subscription to in-person instruction was so low. He found himself in a situation where we could have instruction for District 75 severely disabled students, as well as elementary and pre-K students. And that's what the science and that's what the experience in Europe and Asia has been telling us for many, many, many months. And the mayor wasn't instituting that because of his obsession with live instruction for all, which really meant very little live instruction for anybody.
What you're referring to, by the way, excuse me, you're referring to the fact that initially not only select groups of parents kind of opted in to have their children do the hybrid kind of in-class and out-of-class learning. So then they weren't able to go back in, but now they may be able to. There's so much chaos around this about people not knowing what they're even eligible for. So I think that really has complicated it. But yes, so when you say he stumbled into it, you mean he had a smaller group that said they wanted to come back?
That's right. A small group of parents and children had already opted into online learning. Then he had a sudden kind of blue light special that one time only parents and kids could opt in. Only 30,000 of the hundreds of thousands of students in the New York City public schools took advantage of that because they distrusted perhaps the safety, but I think also just the consistency of the in-person environment. And so he found himself with a couple 100,000. That's a good number, but it's a fifth of the enrollment who had opted in. And with that, we could have distance learning. We could have socially distanced live instruction. And that's what we have starting today in New York City elementary schools Preschool has been going on pretty much live the whole time, as has District 75 for the severely disabled.
Now, the mayor has gotten a lot of criticism, and I just read that the UFT president really sees this performance as a reason to take away mayoral control. And he's, just doesn't think that it's working out. What's your take on mayoral control?
I think mayoral control makes sense. I think we have to think seriously about the strains that we've seen in mayoral control, where a non-educator mayor seems to have taken arrogant control over the school system without really relying on the chancellor and other educators in the system. So the strains are definitely showing, but the idea that we would have a lay board of non-educators who would take over the system, a majority appointed by politicians who aren't the mayor, just doesn't seem to be the right solution.
I remember when we had a conversation a while back now, before we knew who the new chancellor was going to be, after Carmen Farina retired, you had said you hoped that the chancellor would be an independent chancellor, not under the strict control of the mayor. How do you think this has played out in terms of Chancellor Carranza?
Well, it's played out horribly. I think the mayor insists on a kind of fidelity that is inappropriate, and I think the chancellor misunderstood the role of the chancellor as a subordinate official to the mayor. It's important to understand that the DOE, the Department of Education, is not a mayoral agency in the typical sense of police, sanitation, and other departments. It's a school district, and we need professional management of that school district under regulation of the state education department rather than of the mayor of the city of New York. And I wish the mayor, and I hope the mayoral candidates will understand to defer to the chancellor as the educator in chief and not to micromanage for political purposes the education of our children.
Now, there's been constant squabbling between the mayor and the governor. And I've had people ask me, so really who's responsible for what when it comes to the schools? Could you lend some clarity on that issue?
Sure. The governor actually has no constitutional authority, New York State constitutional authority over the schools. That should be run by the Board of Regents and the over 700 school districts in the state, including New York City. It's only because of his emergency powers granted to him by the legislature that he's been able to decide when schools will open and when schools will close. The mayor himself doesn't have that direct authority. He's assumed the direct authority because of a feckless chancellor who has allowed him to do so. But it really ought to be the chancellor, not the governor and not the mayor, who is running the school system.
Now, another issue that was a big one was the testing, the standardized testing in schools. Right now, testing, because of the pandemic, has kind of taken a back seat. What's your view on testing? Are we witnessing a golden moment now? We haven't had all this testing and let's move forward, or what's your take on that?
I think it's not so much a golden moment as a rusted moment where we see how little sense these tests really make. That in all of grading policy, in all of this sorting that goes on in the New York City public schools and in higher ed as well, it has so much to do with parental privilege, and we have to take that into account. And the tests privilege wealthier, better educated parents, so that I think this is a time that we have to take a look at the sorting mechanisms that we all in our society engage in, because it simply adds value to the wealth and privilege that people already have that I think ultimately probably hurts the society rather than helps.
So before we move on to looking a little bit at CUNY and the national picture, I just want to go back one more time to the DOE. If you could write out a plan for them right now to how to look toward the rest of this academic year, what would you be telling them would be the best ideas in terms of having students come back on campus? What's your take on how we should best proceed forward based on what we know?
As I understand the science and the market of the vaccines, we're going to be in this situation until at least the summer. And so I think the mayor probably needs to make a plan. He needs to start planning for September, but he also has to plan for what amounts to the second semester, and probably to stick with where we are with elementary instruction, pre-K and disabled students getting that live instruction that they most need it. That would mean probably opening up the middle and high schools to even more elementary school students, because they could occupy those spaces. I know that will disappoint a lot of parents of secondary school students, a lot of kids who are going to be applying for college, et cetera. But what we seem to know is that the infection rates are lower for the smaller kids. They get less sick. They spread the disease less, and it's the medical situation that unfortunately has to drive the educational situation.
And they are also better equipped to handle the online remote instruction on their own.
The older kids, and,
Yeah,
and those parents can probably go to work.
Right.
Some trepidation leaving their teenagers home alone, but they can't leave their 8-year-olds home alone.
I mean, it's not ideal. We've had college students on who said, oh, they really were fine with remote instruction, but when asked when the pandemic is over, what would you prefer? Oh, all of them back to school, face to face. So let's move over to CUNY a minute. How do you feel CUNY has handled the pandemic?
CUNY has, I think, had it easier than the K through 12 system with adult learners. I know that at Brooklyn College, we were basically told on a given day that the campus would be closed, that we were going to be going into a remote situation. I think probably there was more tech available to those college students and graduate students than in the K through 12 environment. But CUNY still had a very, very hard time getting devices into the hands of students, getting internet to those who didn't have it. And so we all struggled in my own classes. We seem to have been doing okay, but it's nowhere near the effectiveness, I don't think, at the energy of a live classroom. I can't wait to get back to school.
Me either, but of course that's not their fault. I mean, that's what that is. But so let's we're running out of time already. Betsy DeVos and Biden, let's take a look about moving forward. What would be some of the worst things you want to see rectified from the Trump-DeVos legacy? And what are your biggest hopes for Biden in terms of education?
Before I go there, I do want to talk about how CUNY has treated faculty. And I think that it gets an F. I think that in dismissing so many adjunct instructors, increasing class sizes, CUNY should have taken a lead, an instructional, educational lead, again, rather than letting the politicians drive the educational agenda. So putting that now aside and talking about the national situation, it is a great thing for American education, particularly American public education, that Betsy DeVos will no longer be the Secretary of Education, let alone all the other misdeeds and transgressions of the Trump administration. I look forward to the Biden administration, and I hope that he chooses a Secretary of Education who's really able to take over the department. There's been a lot of talk about Biden choosing a teacher or at least a former teacher as secretary. I think that's an unimportant qualification in this case. We don't want the federal government micromanaging classrooms. We don't want the federal government thinking they know better than teachers in the classroom what kids need. Federal education policy is mostly about money. It's about Title I regulation. It's about student loan repayment or forgiveness. And I think we need somebody who has those federal policy chops in the position rather than mere symbolism which is what I think we might get if Biden puts the ex-teacher piece over what it takes to be the actual head of the Federal Department of Education.
Do you have someone in mind who you think would be a good candidate?
I actually think that Catherine Lehman, who is the ex-Assistant Secretary of Education for Civil Rights, would be a good choice. She's somebody who has been in the building. She knows the way Congress works. She knows the way the federal bureaucracy works, and we need somebody who can fight that battle, all those battles. In addition to which, she's a great proponent of the rights of students of color, the rights of LGBTQ students, and it's really that kind of enforcement and equity that goes into departmental policy rather than instructional policy. And I think that that's a widespread misunderstanding of the role of federal government in education.
Is that one of the worst parts of the DeVos legacy? How those students have been treated and the kinds of things the Trump administration has put into place?
It probably is. She changed Title IX regulations. She has tried to drive money to private schools rather than to public schools. And she rescinded Obama-era requirements for just the reporting of disparities in discipline regarding Black and Latinx students as opposed to white and Asian students. We really need somebody, and Lehman was the one who put forward the idea that we needed to protect the rights of LGBTQ students in education. That was rescinded as well.
So, David, we're out of time. I thank you so much for helping us kind of assess what's going on, what's gone on, and what we hope will be. So, thank you so much.
Linda and Jerry behind the camera, this is our annual holiday moment. So it's good to see you again, and I hope to do it again next year where we can look back on this period.
And yes, and hope 2021 is going to be a whole lot better for everybody. So stay well, take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. With disinformation running rampant and unfounded conspiracy theories making their way into the mainstream of American politics, an opinion piece by Charles Salter in Edweek calls for a civics graduation requirement. Salter observes that the ability to discern fact from fiction is fundamental to a democracy. He advocates for required civics education in which students learn how a democracy functions and their role in making it work. EdSurge reports that an assessment conducted by the nonprofit organization NWEA shows that students in 3rd through 8th grades have demonstrated learning loss because of the coronavirus. But they did score better than expected, with math showing the larger drop-off. The organization gives credit to teachers and increased parental support for these more positive results. Once again, employers have listed the top skills they desire, and they are not STEM focused. The so-called soft skills they value are teamwork, sales and customer service, leadership, and problem-solving complex thinking abilities. Many Americans have come to rely on infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci for reliable information on COVID-19. Now we learn that he is also inspiring a new generation of doctors. The Association of American Medical Colleges reports applications to medical schools are up over 18% this year. According to a report by WGBH-TV in Boston, admissions officials and students say the example set by Dr. Fauci and other frontline workers and medical professions are fueling their increased interest in making a difference through medicine. That's it for this edition of EdCast. We wish you a wonderful and safe holiday. We'll see you in 2021, a year we hope will be better for us all. We hope this year-end review of education in 2020 has helped contextualize and clarify some key issues. We produced a number of shows this year aimed at providing important information for parents, educators, and students. If you'd like to learn more about the impact of COVID-19 on education, we invite you to visit the CUNY TV website or youtube.com/CUNY to hear a range of perspectives on topics including online learning, the digital divide, returning to campus during the pandemic, and assisting children and adolescents cope with the stress of COVID-19. As we continue to learn more about the coronavirus and look forward to a vaccine, we can expect education policies and programs that better serve as students' needs. Thank you for joining us on Edcast throughout this difficult time. We wish you all the best for the coming new year.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.